Hello, and good to join you with another webinar here from Klozers. And today we're talking about technical buyers. And if sales training fails, why is that? So we'll cover this in more detail as we go through. And the important thing that we're going to find out is where we can actually support you and give you some pointers through our experience and experience we've met with other clients of ours dealing with technical buyers, because sometimes if you don't know, you don't really know how to approach it. So what to do instead. So just sort of reading through this slide here. And again, this is evidenced. Again, 77% of B2B buyers describe their purchase as extremely complex. And technical buyers take a lot longer than standard B2B deals. And again, with these technical stakeholders, they have a veto power over purchase. And I was speaking to a client yesterday, and he was talking about that, how one of his clients was 100% technical veto was allowed. So it's a way you have to really think about your deals, because sometimes you think everything's going well and you start getting into the process and it all slows down quite a bit. I've worked in a few different areas in pharmaceuticals, technology for healthcare, mobile healthcare, and also in IFS and large software systems. And there was always a big technical input into these deals.
Neil, I'm just thinking, forgive me for interrupting, but I remember many, many years ago when I was much younger, I called on a managing director of a large crane company. And at the time I was selling construction machinery, cranes. And whilst I got into the managing director's office, he promptly told me that in order to sell them anything, I had to start with the technical department. And only once it got approval from the technical people would they even consider it. So, sometimes, depending on the product or service, sometimes the technical buyer is actually the best starting point. Not always, but sometimes it is the best starting point.
And I would tend to agree with that. For the last 5 years, I was selling enterprise software, and it always had to fit in with the system, because what they said, if it didn't fit in the system, it would break it, and basically the company would stop functioning if it wasn't a good fit. So you couldn't really start without having that engagement to actually start talking about how it worked. But it was about building it together, and we'll go into how you build that in together with the whole idea of a group of people that you're going to be talking to. So again, quite often technical buyers, they're looking for evidence and they're looking for safety, and they tend to be very risk averse. So when you're coming with a new idea, it's very important to give them support, give them help, so they actually understand what you're trying to do, rather than just sort of marketing speak, talking to them. And these are the sort of things we're going to come out with at the end. You're going to walk away with some top tips that you can use to take your program forward. So again, this is your roadmap for technical sales success. As I say, you need to have your new data-driven sales framework that builds your credibility, that you can actually emphasize through data and through information how you can actually show them a way forward to incorporate your new ideas into their existing structure without causing a break. And again, with a lot of traditional sales, it works in lots and lots of areas, but it can actually have completely the wrong impression with technical buyers. And that's partly to do with personality profiles. And I'm sure many people on the call today have done these different types of things about people who are analytic, people who are outgoing, people who are people-centric. And quite often with technical buyers, they fall in one corner and they need information, and they're not so interested in all the big ideas or things like that. They want to know it's going to work. They want to know it's going to fit in with their system, and it's going to help them, again, look good, because at the end of the day, if you can provide something that works and improves the way the system is running at the moment, you can deliver a lot better value to the company, but also get the reassurance from the technical department to give you that stamp of approval to move on to the next stage. And I think that's quite an important point at the bottom. You know, results of 84% of technical buyers distrust benefit for salespeople. You know, because if they say a benefit, they always say, yeah, so what? So what? Give me some evidence. So again, technical decisions are committee decisions, and that's sometimes what can slow down your whole process, because you can talk about the high level ideas. This is good. You can do this, you can do that. You can join your companies together. You can improve your throughput in your factory. You can get better outcomes. You can have better monitoring of what's actually going on. And that's all great, but where's the data? Where's the information? Do you have any proof points from that? And then these groups tend to start to talk internally together, and you have lots of competing ideas. And if you can help support the technical buyer with the right information, it means that they're going to these meetings not having to think why they're doing it or why they're making these decisions. So you can actually become an ally if you take the right approach by providing the right sort of information, so that they can do that. Because the numbers work with the C-level as well. You know, if they can come in with the good technical data of why your system, approach, or products are going to change how they're doing for the better, and they're going to be compatible with what they're doing at the moment going forward, it's going to actually make you much more respected and have an ally when they're actually making these discussions, rather than having a blocker. Have you got any more sort of comments on that? Because you've been in quite a few of these type of discussions, Ian.
Yeah, I think for me, everything has to be customer centric, and technical buyers vary. I remember when I was working with the people at Microsoft, the only contacts they had were the heads of IT, you know, way back in the day. And in many cases, with when you're selling Microsoft licensing, the actual blocker is the technical buyer, because the head of IT understands that if they buy licenses, those licenses have to be deployed, and deploying the licenses creates a whole load of extra work for the head of IT. The whole department has a whole load of work, and in many cases, the IT department was the blocker, and it wasn't until you know, the Microsoft guys would go out and talk to what we described as the line of business head. So for sale for sales, that selling the Microsoft CRM, it was going to talk to sales and marketing. You know, it could be ops if it was their ERP system. But in many cases, the technical buyer was the problem, but because they knew it, they could work around that. So I guess my advice would be, as a starting point, is you have to understand the customer's world, you have to understand the buyer's world, and don't assume that the buyer, the technical buyer, is actually on your side. Don't assume that the technical buyer is going to favor any solution, right? They can quite often favor the status quo, because the status quo means that they don't have to do any work. And
Yeah.
and the only other thing I would add that I was thinking about, Neil, is that, you know, you and I sell sales training. It's not a product. It's not SaaS. It's not technical. It's not software. But we still have a technical buyer. I just had an hour-long call this morning with a head of L&D, and he is the technical buyer, if you like, for that in that organization. So I would urge people to think more broadly, and don't think that this is not going to apply if you're not selling a technical product. If you're selling consulting services, in many cases, there's going to be a technical buyer there as well. So don't just think about this from a product perspective or a technology perspective, think about, right across the board, there's typically going to be somebody who's looking at evaluating your solution from a technical perspective. Does it meet all their criteria?
And when I was for the last 5 years selling ERP, EM, enterprise software solutions to industry, we used to very often take along a technical consultant or a functional consultant or a pre-sales consultant that could answer a lot of these questions, because otherwise it was a case of having to go away and come back again and answer it, because you can't just go blah and hope that it's okay. You have to give them absolutely the right answer if they're asking about a specific integration or something like that.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's having a sales group or a sales team that work together on these projects.
And that alone can cause some challenges, Neil, because sometimes, pre-sales are technically, for a lot of companies, pre-sales are a billable resource. They're taking them off some sort of delivery project, and the company doesn't necessarily can afford to do that, not just because of a financial issue, but because of the delivery schedules that they've got to meet. So sometimes it's difficult getting access to pre-sales people. Sometimes salespeople bring in pre-sales too early, and the deal's not properly qualified, and in essence, they're wasting the time of a valuable resource. So we could probably do a whole other webinar just around that integration between sales and the pre-sales team.
Yeah, and I think, again, it's trying to understand the mindset of the people you're talking to, and sometimes it's appropriate, sometimes it's too early, depending who you're talking to. But how everything's interconnected within the sort of IFS ecosystem that we work, we used to talk about business value engineering and looking at the company's objectives or goals, and then looking at what is landscape at the moment, and then the potential to be landscape, and then what were the blockers in between. And then you were able to start having a good discussion, because everything was aligned with company objectives, but you also had these two areas as part of a six-box model, which were what you've got at the moment and what you could have, and what is the issue between them. So in a lot of cases, that raised a lot of information early on before you had to get too deeply into it, because there might be well, that won't be compatible with what we're doing at the moment, or we're going to create new integrations for that. So it's always a sort of trying to find out more. And no's are quite often a good situation to be in, because if someone starts saying no, then it's a case of, well, what's the issue here? So you're raising it, and then you can answer that. And again, with technical buyers, as we've mentioned earlier, it's about the credibility, technical competence and relevant experience. And that's why, as someone who's not a technical person, when you're in there, I'd always put my hand up and go, that's not my area, but I have got people in my organizations I can ask that question. And okay, it maybe didn't get answered on the day, but you weren't actually just trying to blast something out. You were saying, I'll put that to one side and I'll come back to you with some sort of useful answer for you. And again, the bit that says relevant experience, I think that's very often when you've got case studies and things that you've done as an organization you can reference, and you might be able to put the two people in contact. So it's a chief information officer talking to another chief information officer, and they can, use that as a support rather than actually just saying, yeah, of course we've done that. It's a case of being able to reference it through a case study or through some sort of personal contact. And I had to admit my intellectual honesty, lots of limitations. So things that can start to kill deals, it's when you go in the old style selling and feature dumps. I don't think that works in any kind of selling. It's not just with technical sales, when you just go, oh, we've got this, we've got that, we've got that, we've got that, because people, you just see them starting to glaze over, because you're not really engaging, you're just saying all these things. And again, this can happen in software sales, where people are trying to sell things that haven't been built yet. They believe they can build it, but sometimes you get caught out, because then they say, well, can you really show me that? Does it really work? So you have to be careful about over-promising. What was that, Ian?
I was just going to say, probably the people on the on this webinar are maybe thinking nobody still does that. I can promise you, people do still do this. Neil and I are working on a big project at the moment, and one of the challenges is the salespeople going in and doing this feature dump on the software without asking any form of what you might call discovery questions. They just go in and, metaphorically, they've got the SaaS solution under their arm, and it's just, okay, here you go, blah, 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 blah. So I think many people would assume that that doesn't go on anymore because, I don't know, features and benefits is from the 1970s. But I promise it does still go on, and it's still a big issue for a lot of teams.
Yeah. And again, claiming no trade-offs exist, I've found that especially with enterprise software and some of the more complex solutions, you have to find out ways to integrate your system. For example, quite often in construction and some large engineering projects, they have CAD systems which have to be standalone but have to integrate so you can do planning and ordering and supply chain and all these sort of things. But to actually think you've got this wizard solution that'll just drop in and it'll just work is nobody takes you seriously if you try and say that. And again, the pressure play, again, a lot of these people, because they're what I would call risk averse, and they have to really feel they've thought it through. They really have to feel they have a plan in place and it is definitely going to work and they've checked everything. To actually try and hurry people at that stage is a definite red flag. And you almost have to tease it out of them what their next step will be, rather than try and say, okay, can we do it by the end of the year, or can we do it at the end of the month, or things like that. It tends to be a straight blocker. And again, rapport does not necessarily equal credibility. Even though you get on really well with your best of pals, you talk about all sorts of sports or whatever you're doing, at the end of the day, they still have that duty of care to their organization to make sure that what you're saying is actually right. That sort of friendliness gets you only so far. It won't actually get you over that bump if you haven't convinced them that you've got the thing they really need. Yeah, any comments on that, Ian?
I'm just thinking this goes back to what you mentioned a couple of minutes ago about these people are risk averse, and in some cases, maybe the majority, I don't know, but certainly in a lot of cases, they're putting their credibility on the line internally.
Yeah.
And there's no smarmy sales techniques that's actually going to get around that. You've got to address that head on. The one thing I was going to ask you, Neil, was, in your opinion and experience, is there ever a scenario where there is no form of compromise, where it's not meeting, it doesn't meet 100% of their actual requirements, whether that be from productivity or integration? Is there ever a scenario where it's perfect and all the ducks do line up, or is there always something where they've got to compromise?
I would say every single time you've got some form of compromise. Sometimes it's bigger, sometimes it's smaller, and it depends on the processes that businesses are using if you'll be a perfect fit or not. But quite often they have other systems or processes that they don't want to give up. They've just invested in that 2 years ago. They want to run that out, and they might then integrate that at a later stage. Or there's some technical issues that they have that they must use because of local regulations as well, especially where I live in Germany. There are a lot of things around data and things like that that I have seen in some cases that standard software is not compliant, and they have to buy a second piece of software to sit alongside so that they can be legally compliant within their own country. So you always have to consider these slight nuances. And it can be also with a physical product that, for instance, is doing a mechanical process that you're selling in. There might be something else that needs to be added on, some thing at the end of the process so that they can make sure that they're managing the safety and security of that product going forward should they need to do a recall. And that might not be standard out of the box with your system, but you maybe have to come up together with them to provide that solution so that it will both work going forward.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, just looking at the sort of 4 core principles, again, get the information across, look at what you've got, what it really is, and how, you can actually demonstrate that through evidential papers and contacts, recommendations, potentially site visits to go and actually see something running properly at a site that or your own demonstration centre so you can actually really prove it. And then again, not trying to brush technical objections under the carpet, really asking the questions, as we mentioned, to make sure that they fit. And again, peer recommendations really count for a lot. I know just recently in the last week, IFS have once a year in the UK what they call the IFS User Conference, which is a great conference where all the different businesses that use the software within their business come together, and the various partners talk to them, the various presentations, various discussions. Mostly real life users are getting on stage and saying their experience, and then they've got that peer-to-peer networking. So again, if you can create something like that, or you've got something like that you can tap into, you can sometimes shortcut a lot of these issues by saying, well, go and speak to this company or go and speak to that company. It can be a very valuable way of getting around these challenges. And again, I'm talking about long lead times. You might have a much shorter lead time in your process that things go quite quickly, but it's still, these various points have to be covered off. You can't just sort of pretend they're not there. I think it's better to talk about them early and talk about them soon to get the answers flushed out. And again, the bottom one, a lot of people say, well, you're going to save this, you're going to do that, you're going to get this return on investment. But if the system doesn't work, you get nothing, or you get a failed implementation, which is even worse. So this is sort of bluntly saying what we've just mentioned. The old approach, our solution will reduce your downtime by 40%. Yeah, so what? Why? Can you show me? Whereas looking at, again, it's saying there, it's specific and it's talking exactly about it, which then a question can be asked that you can give a proof point. You can show them your white paper, you can show them your references and show that that really did work and it would work in their industry as well. So again, it's about giving them something, not something up in the air, something real that they can challenge. You can convince them, or well, not convince them, show them through evidence that it works. And this is the part I mentioned slightly earlier on about turning objections into collaborations, because if they say, well, will it work with this, this, and this, and be able to do that, and you can get them the evidence, it means when they go to that meeting, that collaboration meeting with other people from the C-suite or from the project team, they've got stuff they can talk about. They're not going to lose face because they get a sort of curveball from one of the senior management to actually, but what about this, this, and this? And if you support them, they can sometimes be your best ally in the process. Although I would always say you need to be working at various levels within an organization. Don't just have 1 or 2 points of contact. You want to have 4 to 6 points of contact so you've got different angles, because you won't always meet them all together. You might meet them at the start of the process just to get the sort of way to go, but you're probably meeting with subsets at any one time. So if you can support your people that are helping you with this, with good information, it makes it so much easier for them to do their job, and they don't feel hung out when they're in a meeting and they get that sort of from left field. What do you think, Ian?
Yeah, I completely agree. That the one thing I'm thinking of is, and most people might think that this doesn't actually apply to the technical buyer, but I think it's definitely worth having the conversation and thinking about this, is that when you're selling a technical product, you have to sell not just the product, but the change. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, the best example I've got is we wanted to upgrade our CRM, but we didn't for years, not because of any other reason than it was we couldn't get our head around how to unplug it, because our CRM's integrated to the website, integrated to some of our other systems, and we couldn't get our head around how we were going to unplug it, if you like, decouple it from everything, right, and then recouple any new CRM. And it wasn't until we got our head around that we managed to move forward. So lots of people talked to us about, came to us with a great CRM product, but we didn't buy it, not because of the product, but because they never actually sold us the change. They never told us how we could move from what was our status quo at the time to this new scenario with their solution. So, and again, somebody might think, well, maybe that's not the under the remit of a technical buyer, right? They've got to have confidence in the overall solution, and for me, that's a big part of the solution. It's easy, and again, forgive me, I'm using CRM as an example. It's really easy to deploy a CRM. Getting adoption of a CRM is a totally different thing.
Yes.
And again, that's something that that a lot of people don't sell, right, or don't think about in their questioning, right, when they're selling any form of technical solution.
Yeah, I think that's a very important one. There used to be a saying, the software will always work, but it's sometimes getting the people to accept the software. That's your bigger challenge.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm going the wrong way here. So again, the technical proof before business ROI, it's showing them that it'll work. Just what Ian was talking about, we can make this integration work for you, and it will be relatively easy, and your people will like to use it once it's done. And again, how does this work? What is the risk? Again, we mentioned risk aversion before, and then about the whole implementation planning. And even if it's a capital equipment to go into a factory, something's got to come out. Usually something has to go in. You have to have no loss of downtime. And, these are questions you have to think about. So people talk a lot about digital transformation, but it's also how people work. There is always this transformation in a business if you're putting in a high value business to business solution. It's very seldom that it's just a thanks very much, we'll just use it. You have to consider that whole process. And by talking about that process, it makes it clearer to them, and they're able to throw up various objections which you can then cover or say, this is how you would do it, this is how you need to approach it. And sometimes it's what Ian was talking about with the CRM, how it's coupled. I knew two people that did the Edinburgh Airport change probably 12, 15 years ago. One was a PM, the other one was the business analyst. And what they said, because they moved the business away from British Airports Authority to a new authority, but they had to keep the airport running. They couldn't shut the airport down. And what they said is they actually decoupled a lot and created what they called a slight island of information that would work. And then they separated it from what was originally the British Airports Authority. And as you can see, Edinburgh Airport's still running and going from strength to strength. But sometimes you don't think about that. Here's a great project, let's do it. So again, this is what we really want to talk about today. It's about your team. Is the team ready for technical sales? And we've come up with this technical competence assessment, when you can actually look at what you're talking to people about without using marketing speak. It's very down to earth, numbers, figures, data. You understand their technical problems, their challenges, what they're trying to do for their company, and how your solution, whether it's a physical object, whether it's software, whether it's intellectual consulting, how that will actually work for them to solve what they really want. And then again, the sort of peer level implementation conversations, I would, as I mentioned, either bring in pre-sales or a competent consultant that could actually answer the technical questions. And that might not be capable to have someone physically there, but there could be a question, it could be sent away, and then there could be a technical answer given back. So there are more than one ways of actually physically turning up to do that. But as you see, the number's quite low. If you look at the bottom number.
Neil, I was just thinking, and I have to say that I'm actually, it might not come across like this, but I'm a huge fan of salespeople. I know how difficult sales is. So and I don't believe in bashing salespeople, but a lot of salespeople could only do these things with the support of a PowerPoint. And for me, you need to be able to articulate it without a PowerPoint. Now, I'm not saying don't use PowerPoint at any time, but if you've got a really good, deep understanding of your product, you shouldn't need a PowerPoint to actually sell it. You should be able to have that conversation because for me, PowerPoint it's a crutch. And if you cannot have a conversation with a technical buyer without a PowerPoint, to me that's a problem. So I would ask yourself, the questions that Neil's put up there. Yes, they can maybe do it, but can they do it without a PowerPoint to support them?
Yeah. Yeah, that's an important point. It does take time, but you need to be able to also be versatile. I had a conversation with a business in Germany yesterday, and he was saying how you have to have that sort of mental agility to talk to someone and ask them the right questions, and then you maybe not quite get an answer you want, but to be able to jump across and draw out something else, even if it's a reference, if it's an idea, it's maybe a recommendation that you need to other technical buyers they know that might find this interesting. You can't always have it completely structured. You have to have a lot in the sort of background going on so you can jump about.
Yeah.
Without being distracting, obviously, or rambling. So here's what we would recommend looking at a sort of outline transformation plan. It's looking at what your materials are within your business, how you're using them, the sort of conversations people are tending to have with technical buyers, and potentially what the kickback is. Are they getting a good result? Are they always finding a block at a certain point? To actually it's really having a good diagnosis of the whole process about what's working, what's not working, or where it's stopping. Is that, by doing a deal analysis, actually looking about, is there a blocker on a regular basis at a certain point? And then once you've done that, and you have to be pretty honest with yourself, because everyone likes to sometimes look the other way and blame everybody else. But you have to be honest. The more honest you can be at this stage, the better the second step will be. Because then what you're starting to do is you're starting to create technical battle cards, where you're talking to your team about how it's gone. Some people say, well, I'll always get over that point by doing this. That's a point you can start to add in, and again, talking about training to actually overcome these objections, or at least take the objection on board and come back with a good answer. It might not be instant, but it might be what you can do because you've got that in your arsenal to come back and sort that out. And again, looking at the sort of way that you conduct the steps to make sure you're focusing in the right way and making sure you're getting things covered properly. Are there any two ideas on these first couple of points, Ian, before we move on to the implementation part?
Yeah, I think that again, a lot of companies are not familiar with battle cards. If it's a phrase that's new to you, basically, I would describe it as a a one or a two-page at the most cheat sheet when you're in a compete situation where the salesperson, before he goes into a meeting, before he jumps on a call, right, he can have a quick look at this, and it's not a script, but it's going to help him understand where he needs to uh, move the conversation to, shall we say, where he needs to guide the customer onto in terms of the ground that is more likely for him to win than it is for the competition to win. And they're extremely useful. We spend a lot of time creating battle cards for clients because they love them, and they will have some sort of technical detail on there. But what goes alongside that is some form of leave behind with.
Yeah, so people have got something. I think you've.
Forgive me, I can't remember the psychology behind this, but if you've got some form of leave behind, as in a flyer that you're going to leave behind with a technical buyer, people tend to believe something that's written down much more than if you say it. So
Yeah.
any of your stats, any of your data that you want to leverage and focus on, make sure you've got that in some well-branded document that you can leave behind if it's a physical visit. If it's via Teams, if you're selling remotely, that's something, a PDF that you could share with them. But people tend to believe things that are written down, shall we say, rather than coming just out the salesperson's mouth. But definitely get yourself some battle cards, and definitely get yourself some really good leave behinds that actually show your product or service in the best light.
Yeah. There was an interesting one we were talking about leave behinds. There was a manager in sales that used to work in the whiskey industry that I knew. And he was saying when he was at these sort of association meetings and things like that, and they were selling a technical product to go into a distillery. And he said what they did is instead of making an A4 leave behind, he made an A5 leave behind because in Scotland, a lot of these events, people tend to be wearing kilts. And if it's an A5 leave behind, they could fold it once and pop it in their sporran. But it worked. He said it was a really good one. Key
I thought you were going to
points.
tell us the leave behind was a bottle of whiskey, but
But the third point, the implementation part is really important for the sales managers that are on the call or the sales leaders on the call. It's about sort of taking what we've decided, taking what we've found out, and then seeing how it's delivered in the field. See if it's working, see if you're getting different results, and then that sort of real-time coaching, supporting your sales team to watch what they're doing and give them extra support about areas where they could maybe do things better, they could improve what they're actually doing. And then looking at your early results, again, with marketing and sales, I always say it's all about mathematics. If you make a change and you're starting to find you're getting further along the line and you're making better progress, then mark it down, get a pat on the back. But otherwise, if it's not working, then you have to go back to the drawing board again. And that's one of the things about sales. Again, it is quite technical itself.
yeah.
So this is really sort of how we're tying things up at the moment, And again, looking at these sort of technical skeptics into advocates, I think that is a really important thing. If you do it right, you really do have someone who's really happy to talk to you, pick up the phone to you, ask your advice, ask you how you can support them through. And I've had that even in the past when I worked in pharmaceuticals, because we always had to work off white papers, and it was always evidence that was in the public domain, and you couldn't just say this stuff's great, use it, because these guys are senior cardiovascular consultants. But it took a while. It was like a convincer cell, and sometimes what you would find is over time, because you give them the right answer, you found the right solution for them, you'd shown them how this was different to that, and it gave a better outcome in the patient population, you would start to hear your own words being fed back to you. And that's when you knew you got the job done, because they're going, oh yeah, oh, that's a really good idea. Because you could never walk in as a sales rep and tell a consultant what to do. But over time, given the right information, going to the right associations, talking to peers who they respected that were using that process or that system, you were able to get results and things would turn around, but they wouldn't turn around necessarily quickly, but you have to have that long-term vision about knowing where you're going. So with them, again, it was data and then obviously benefits as well. But again, if you are getting objections, that's usually a good sign, because if they're not objecting, they're not interested. If they're objecting, they're saying, tell me more. I'd like to understand that because I don't understand that at the moment, or it doesn't work with me. Or potentially they have a misunderstanding. It gives you that chance to explain that a little bit further. And again, this peer level technical credibility is really important. If you've got a few clients that you're working with, they're really happy with what you're doing, they're able to actually evidence how it's helped their business. And I remember in the IBS world, there was one company said, I don't want to talk to competing companies as a reference because this software is my competitive advantage, and I'd rather they had the other software. But sometimes you'll get people who will be very happy to talk, stand up at these user group meetings and actually say, we're using this and this is what we've got. And that is so much more credible than you as a salesperson saying it, if you can support them to do that. And then again, the sort of technical viability first, before you start talking about money, that it does fit, it's not going to break the system, they're not going to look silly, you know, they're going to be assured, as it were, I think is the important thing, that what you're saying is actually going to work for them. And I think that's the key takeaway. They aren't difficult, they're just different. And it's sometimes thinking different is what's going to make the difference for you. What do you think, Ian?
I agree. I think for me, everybody in sales is looking for a magic wand. Everybody in sales is looking for like the master class, but the best sales guys do the fundamentals better, more consistently than anybody else. You know, they don't need, you know, for them, there is no masterclass. They are focused on the fundamentals and executing this stuff really well. The one thing I would add to this is that, you know, with all your data, you know, objection handling, all the rest of it, all of that goes much smoother if you can wrap it up in storytelling.
Yeah.
So, you know, take each of those 4 points on the screen there, right, and create what I would describe as micro stories, some really short stories that are easy to remember, right, and that will resonate with the customer, because, you know, data alone, you know, can be a little bit dry, but if you wrap it up in a really good story, right, it becomes much more interesting. It becomes much more it just resonates with the audience much better. So I would take each of those 4 points and wrap them up in some form of storytelling.
And I think that's a very important point, because again, this person might be what you could call your ball carrier. They're taking your idea to another meeting. And if you have a little story, it's easier for them to remember to then recount that story when they're in the meeting. So I forgot to mention at the start that if you did have any questions, please, you know, raise your hand, drop them in the chat. But we're just coming on to the Q&A. So if there's anything burning that you think I'd like to know a bit more about that, or I'm not quite sure about that, please drop a question in the chat and we'll do our best to answer it for you.
If I could just add also, if you're viewing this recording via YouTube or via our website after the fact, feel free to reach out to either Neil or myself. And, you know, if you've got any questions, we're more than happy to try and help. And if it is via YouTube, I'm supposed to tell you to hit subscribe, hit the like button, and whatever else it is you do on social media.
So just give me a wee bit about what's coming up, you know, forthcoming attractions. You know, we're going to be talking about the real ROI of sales training and what the CFA needs to know. And that's very much a sort of internal process for your company to look at, you know, how you can justify getting more of that budget to invest in your local team, your international team, and how you can do that. And what was the thinking behind this, Ian, that we decided to develop this webinar?
I think I think a lot of companies don't think enough about the outcomes of training. It tends to be an event. It tends to be a one-off situation, and they don't tie the training back to the KPIs. They don't necessarily reinforce the training, sometimes because they don't have any way of reinforcing the training. But for us, obviously, as a provider, it's really important that training actually delivers results.
Yeah.
Yes, it might be great to tick a box. Yes, it might be good because it's bringing the team together and helping them with some form of team bonding. All of those things are good. I'm not saying there's no value to that, but ultimately, everybody wants to see some form of results. So what we thought we'd do is put some stuff in here where we'd give you some ideas on how to measure it and how to set training up so that you actually will get results rather than just just a tick box exercise. And the only other thing I would add to that is that everything that we do at Klozers is stuff that we do in our own business. So we don't teach things that we don't actually do in our own business. Whether it be presenting, whether it be selling via Teams, whether it be ABM, objection handling, everything that we do, we actually do in our own business, and that gives us a really deep understanding of it, and it allows us to share with you what works, but also what doesn't work, what we've tried and doesn't work. So this is another example of where we think that it's really important to practice what we preach.
Yeah, so thanks, Ian. And that sort of sums it up, don't buy sales training, buy results. So thank you very much for everyone who's been on the call and has watched this after the event. Hopefully it's been useful. It's perhaps provoked some ideas, some thoughts that you might want to incorporate into your business. And as Ian mentioned, get in touch with us, drop us a line, my email's above my head, and, have a chat. We might be able to help you somewhere. And I look forward to seeing the rest of you next time on our next webinar. Anything else, Ian, before we go?
No, just thank you to you for all your work in prepping this and delivering this. Thank you very much, Neil.